Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today it is the 18th of October, and today we're beginning with Kursk because we have some really important updates from here regarding Russian advances. Then southeast, we're looking at Kharkiv. That region really has some important updates and reports from the Ukrainian side. Also, around Maximilianivka, an important advance occurred. We'll look at Toretsk, Chasiv Yar, and Velyka Novosilka to the south. First, before I want to get into this, you guys can see here, this is the embedded version of my map. There is no left side control panel that has this really annoying white lights. And so it does improve the viewing experience, but I'll explain for a second why I don't think I should be using it in the future. Now here's the version of the map that you guys are familiar with, and I prefer it because you actually have access to a ruler that shows you the extent of certain advances and also how many square kilometers are filled up by a certain polygon. I don't have that feature on the other version, the more clear version that I showed you guys before. So for today's video, I'm going to use the old map, and if you guys really insist, then I will use the other one. But just for today, you guys have the juxtaposition. So beginning with Kursk, over here, this is very interesting. You have in yellow the advances over the past 24 hours, and you had a really interesting Facebook post by the 95th Air Assault Brigade where they discussed a really deep Russian advance conducted by the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade. That unit, of course, now is very strong in this bridge region between Kurakhove and the Glushkovo district. So they've been pushing into Lyubimovka with the 106th VDV division, and now they're even pushing further eastwards. And they have the ability to, because Lyubimovka has been cleared out. There is no more Ukrainian immediate pressure on that village. And also the forests nearby in recent days have been cleared up by the Russian side, both to the northwest and to the south. Today, Russian sources talked about that extensively. And you can see that the advance, it was conducted by 3 Russian BTRs. They were met by the defenses of the 17th Tank Brigade and the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces. The battle lasted for several hours as you had the BTRs cross past the almost vertical structure of the highway that goes through Selydove and then into Novoivanovka and Leonidovo all the way to Alexandria and even past that point. So in terms of the maximum extent of the Russian advance, it's 11 square kilometers, so it is a large piece of territory that is no longer under strong Ukrainian control, and now the Russians are beginning to assert themselves there, and also 5.6 kilometers to the east of where they were previously furthest located in Zeleny. But then the Ukrainians, they organized their really strong groupings in Malaya Luknaya, Viktorovka. That's really their core here because they have this glue that connects between the Suja region, which is, of course, their main hub in Kursk, and then the forward operating forces that may still have some sort of holdout near Kremyannoy or Pogrebki. And all of that is facilitated through the Malaya Luknaya region. And right now, that corridor is dangerously narrow. It's less than 7 kilometers wide due to the Russian pressure coming in mainly from this direction over here in yellow, but also coming in from Kamishevka towards Pogrebki. So you have to keep that in mind as the battle plays out. And that's why the Ukrainians were so desperate to repel this assault. They did not want the Russians to have a permanent settlement in an area like Viktorovka. Even having a permanent Russian base in an area like Leonidovo is not sustainable long term because it is only about, what did we say, like 4 or 5 kilometers away from the hub, the nucleus of the Ukrainian forces in this advanced position in Kursk. And so the bombardment will shift, the Overton window will shift in terms of vehicular assaults towards this region. And that's why the Ukrainians were engaged in this fierce battle and did not withdraw any further. So they were able to destroy the 3 BTRs. In the process, though, some Russian soldiers did dismount in the nearby tree lines over here and also in the settlements themselves, so you don't have a Ukrainian presence there anymore. Here's the furthest extent you could see it actually, but I'm not even going to mark it as under Russian control because right next to the destroyed Russian BTR, you had a tank from the 17th Tank Brigade that destroyed it. In another incident, you had a Javelin take out a BTR, and then another one, the 95th Brigade, their sappers, they laid a mine and destroyed a vehicle. And then, of course, the Facebook post actually showed the footage of all that. But again, it does show the Russians now pushing into a region that previously, by both sides, was considered to be a gray zone where clashes were occurring, and we didn't have enough footage to fully back up a Russian armored presence there. And so now it's really putting a lot into question about what's going on in the regions of Novo Ivanovka, Leonidovo. The Ukrainian forces also south of Zeleny Shlai, they are in a complicated situation. So Russian sources claim there are attempted Ukrainian counterattacks to retake Shlai, and that makes complete sense because in terms of its location, it's sort of the low-hanging fruit because it sort of branches out from the rest of the Russian salient. Because the Russian salient, you could see sort of going horizontally, and it's very clearly marked with the path over here, for instance, and the connection between several villages. Zeleny Shlai is a relatively small hamlet, and it's connected to a highway that the Ukrainians have access to from the south. So there are armored forces that are close to the border. They can readily come in from Sverdlikovo and make it all the way to the battlefield here. And they're just trying to apply pressure, trying to retake some of the forward posts, not just in the houses, but also in the nearby trenches that are actually really well built by the Russians originally. And that's where the current fighting is occurring along this X over here. But then Tolstoy Lug and Pokrovsky, Russian forces are already claiming that they've been able to take over these specific villages and that the Ukrainians are engaged in a withdrawal from this region. Now, the extent of that really depends on the source that you're looking at. But if I were to take the minimalist Russian position, it would be that they're not fully taken over, but they're still combing these two villages marked with an X. And it's important because these are, of course, difficult villages to crack in such a short period of time because they're based around this lower lying ravine, this Nagost River actually, and on both sides you have these tree lines, and they're not fully concentrated, the villages. And so the 155th Brigade, they're involved with clearing out those two villages, both from Lyubimovka and Obuchovka, while also expanding deeper and putting pressure onto the said corridor that I discussed earlier. Now, a lot of this would have implications for Nizhny Klin, Darino, Nikolaevka Darino. I know that in earlier videos, I talked about how some sources claimed that all of these villages had already fallen. Of course, I'm relatively generous in my marking of what's still under Ukrainian control because I'm only going off of what's admitted by Ukrainians themselves or is proven by actual footage. And so there's the possibility of that already being in the process of occurring. But if it hasn't, then surely this will be an impetus and further momentum for the Russians to then engage and push forward on that sort of northern flank of those remaining Ukrainian villages that are very close to the border. And also they run along this chain of ponds and tree lines. So it is a natural geographic defense line that could very easily be cut off given the circumstances that are unfolding around it. And that would, again, really diminish Ukraine's depth in this region, as the entire Russian goal, as this is all unfolding, is to diminish Ukraine's depth in the efforts to get control over higher elevated positions and roads directly leading into Sudzha from the northwest and from the north directly. Russian sources also discuss attacks towards Malaya Luknaya, but nothing too significant right now. Just a two-pronged attack at this moment would put enormous pressure and enormous strain onto the remaining forces that are engaged in this northern Kursk Ukrainian salient. Because again, the Ukrainian garrison here, it does include a vast array of units. A lot of them, though, are focused on regions that are located further south, either in Sudzha directly, either, just south of Novo Ivanovka or Malaya Luknaya. How many of them are really engaged in areas further north, like Pogrebki? Those regions, a lot of them are largely open, and even the Russians don't have as much commitment to this specific sector. There were certain battalions of the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, for instance, that are operating here, certain Akhmat units, and you have the order of battle just marked here more generally with some of the territorial motor rifle regiments. And so definitely the Ukrainians, they have to fear the possibility of the Russians crossing over the rail line over here and the windbreaks and then putting a lot of pressure from that flank onto Pogrebki. If you're looking at elevation, for instance, the Ukrainian salient here is really, really strategic because all of the heights in this region actually run along the region that the Ukrainians still control. Although right now they're in a defensive posture, they're not going to be able to really utilize it to its full extent. You could see it over here marked with these various red rectangles. And you can see that actually branches out northwards into the gray zone and into where the Russians were operating. So Russians getting control over this entire strip of land, it would give them complete domination of the current battlefield in areas like Novo Ivanovka, where they're currently advancing that are on low elevation. Also complete domination of the chain of villages that goes southwards vertically from Pogrebki all the way to like Luknaya over here. And then, of course, connects to Sudzha itself, which would also be completely dominated by the higher elevation of this said salient. In terms of some other reports that are coming out, you also have Russian claims of attacks towards Ruskaya Konopelka, but nothing too big confirmed as of now. Another interesting thing to note, which further backs the claim that there have been Ukrainian withdrawals from the Tolstoy Lug region, although we don't have enough proof of Russian boots on the ground in that exact area. You could see marked over here. So it's a video from October 17th posted by Russian sources. Drone records over 25 Ukrainian men from a single platoon as they were withdrawing from what probably would be Tolstoy Lug. Just based on the location, they would have had to leave through these roads over here due to pressure coming in from the west. They couldn't really do it from there. And they're advancing along the northern bank, I would suppose, of the Snagost River. And you can't see their full routes in this video, but they're not going to cross through Zeleny Shlaich just due to the volatile situation there. So probably they had to make some sort of turn along the angle of the pond and the tree lines, and then from there go southwards along the vertical highway deeper into controlled territory. And those are the sort of largest formations that the Ukrainians would have in one time in an area like this at the front line. So the fact you're seeing all of them move back together in unison like this does indicate that the Ukrainians definitely do understand the situation, and really their hands were forced into leaving this area after very stiff resistance. Now, looking at the Kharkiv region, Ukrainian sources are making the claim that a lot of the footage coming out recently indicating Russian advances into Kurakhove is actually old, that it comes from the 7th of October all the way to the 14th of October, that 1 week period which ended 4 days ago. They claim that Russian forces were able to send in large quantities of armored elements spanning from tanks like T-72s all the way down to motorcycles or desert crosses. And that came in, of course, from the Pischan flower, as I refer to it. And it, of course, went along this route southwestwards, entered through the actual paved route going vertically into the village, and then the Russians asserted themselves in the northern outskirts. So the claim made by the Ukrainian side is that their 77th Air Mobile Brigade, in addition to elements, specifically the Timur group of Ukraine's GUR military intelligence directorates, were involved in a complex week-long battle to push the Russians out. And in a lot of the footage I've seen, it's also coming from the 1st National Guard Brigade. They're involved in this. And also the Pomsta Revenge Brigade, another National Guard unit formed on the basis of a border detachment, not a brigade, but a detachment. So it was expanded throughout the course of the war. So there's two pieces of footage, which, again, the Ukrainians claim is old and that the Russians were pushed out of, but I have to see proof to the contrary. Until then, I'm actually going to mark it as under Russian advance due to grenades being dropped onto Russian positions in those particular areas. You could see two markers over here. Pomsta Brigade, their grenades hit T-72, 4 vehicles as well, 4 other unnamed vehicles in the northern section of Kurakhove, and those were in backyards or even adjacent to houses that were targeted. And then here you have even further south video from Pomsta Brigade. Their drones dropped grenades onto a single Russian BTR, an MTLB, and also onto a Desert Cross ATV that was carrying ammunition for the Russian forces engaged in the house-to-house fighting here. Also, the Ukrainian side, they released their own footage showing gunfights. You can't see the Russians in the video, but you can see the Ukrainians moving from house to house and, of course, firing their smaller arms towards the Russian side. So definitely there was, at the very least, a battle here at some point over the past week and a half. But now the point of dispute would be as to whether the Russians are still here. Because if they are, based on these latest geolocations, it would imply deep Russian advance into much of Kurakhove. It would also mean the Russians are even closer to the Oskil River. If we're measuring it, probably only about 1.5 kilometers away. And then also means they have a route southwards to enter into Kolesnikivka. Looking at Chasiv Yar, we just have an update based on Ukrainian sources of a slightly deeper infiltration into the Oktyabrski district, which is, of course, located in the eastern portion of the city, just to the west of the Donbass Canal. You can see, based on the information provided by Deep State, that the southern portion of the district was taken over. And this is just a part of recent advances that we talked about in yesterday's video from the 98th VDV Division that involved taking over trenches right next to the canal that are actually on an elevated bank. So those actually were pretty useful for the Ukrainians when they could have utilized them for static defensive positions and as firing points. But of course, Russian vehicles actually started crossing over the canal, crossing over the physical portions that aren't actually in a depressed region. And also just ground forces crossed over and asserted themselves in a lot of these houses in the southern portion as well. And so now they have access to this really all-encompassing road, Nido Khibchenko Street, which then leads directly into the center of Chasiv Yar itself. Now to look at Sukurnia, Some of the sources from the Ukrainian side are basically confirming what I said in yesterday's video surrounding a Russian advance that occurred west of the rail axis, with the Russians now only being, if we're to measure it, 1.5 kilometers away from the paved route that directly connects Andriivka to Selydove. That's really important to note. And besides that fact, we have the more recent updates from today, which include Russian combing operations west of the rail line, including this trench over here, getting additional control over the warehouses. Because again, the Ukrainian component that was defending in Sukornia, which includes elements of the 2nd Battalion of the 15th National Guard Brigade, probably a battalion from the 25th Air Assault Brigade, and there are some other units around here that you can see on the order of battle. They've sort of coalesced around Kremena Balka, that's one region, and also the various agricultural facilities, tree lines that are located just west of Sukornia. So now those regions need to be cleared out by the same Russian forces, the 114th Motor Rifle Brigade, that were involved in the capture of said village, while the DRG raids continue near Novosilka and Izmailivka without much of a change. Now, looking at the Kurakhove front, we have a really important Russian armored assault that occurred earlier today. Released footage from the 46th Air Assault Brigade pointed to a large-scale operation by the 5th Motor Rifle Brigade because, again, they have a huge component of armored assets that are of course, involved in the attacks here, in addition to the 150th Motor Rifle Division, which is the general control node for the sector, and a lot of the tank regiments come from there. So they were, of course, the ones leading this attack. Based on sources from Deep State, regardless of that armored assault, we now know that there's been an even deeper Russian push into Maximilianivka, not just into the center, but also into western portions that cross over the main vertical road that sort of bisects Maximilianivka. So in terms of a western advance, the maximum gain would be 1.1 kilometers, so it is important. And according to Deep State, actually, the entirety of the village is a gray zone, but I'm just going to mark this western edge as still under Ukrainian control until we get some sort of proof otherwise. Also, you can see slight Russian improvement of their positions in these, I believe these are just trails and open patches just south of Hostra, so those are important regions that are slightly higher on elevation compared to the surrounding settlements. Now, to look at the general dynamics over the past day, there were actually two waves of Russian assaults, according to the 46th Brigade. So one of them involved 24 vehicles, and then another one 9. And the claim being made is that the Ukrainians succeeded in destroying 5 tanks, 10 BMPs, and a lot of this was destroyed by artillery, direct tank fire by the Ukrainians themselves, mines, FPVs, and then also they succeeded in damaging 1 BMP and 3 armored vehicles. So that's 19, and probably that means it's 60% out of the total amount of vehicles that they claimed were involved in the attacks in the first place. And you could see based on geolocations that it wasn't confined to one specific axis. There were actually multiple. So you had this push that started along the Centralna road from Kharkiv, pushed into the warehouses actually south of Maximilianivka, getting control over them. Those are important nodes that, of course, could be used to resist in an extended period of time, as we saw in Kharkiv and Marinka. You also had the furthest push of the Russian forces all the way to this region over here, which is pretty deep into Maximilianivka, into the residential areas. So they pushed through the roads and the backyards in those areas. Also, you had a large Russian push going on through open fields to the south and even along this specific highway. So you could see that the furthest Russian extent was around this region over here, which would be, if we're going to measure it out for you guys, a maximum gain of 4.2 kilometers. So that really is a large amount as a result of what occurred with the large concentration of vehicles, where a lot of them definitely were taken off based on the footage. You can see it for yourself with FPVs that struck them directly, direct artillery strikes as well. But the ones that were able to slip through the cracks and actually dismount forces, that's really the big threat, because then you have a permanent presence in these sort of tree lines, and it means that the Russians are only, if we're going to measure it, about 700 meters away from the impromptu defense line set up over here, which is meant to diagonally defend against further Russian infiltrations past the southern flank of Maximilianivka, because you do have 2 layers of defense here that are relatively weak, but they're sort of concentrated on certain sectors that need to be held onto. After this point, though, the Russians would have free reign along the highway to begin reaching the perimeter of Kurakhove. And that's the biggest fear, that the Russians would have access to the highway to then push into Kurakhove itself. And you could already see it with how the Ukrainians are talking about Ostrivska and the Russian gains over there. And then in tandem with large advances in the Maximilianivka region, it would really shape the battlefield in a way where the Russians would have access to two routes actually to enter into eastern Kurakhove, and then also have a more generally a really strong flank, including elevation wise. Because if we're going to look at it elevation wise, I want to mark with the next over here. This region is just completely dominating the villages that the Russians control, like Kharkivka, Maximilianivka. Also dominates the ravine located southwards, where you do have a lot of Ukraine's remaining static positions, as well as dominating Kurakhove itself. So now, for the most part, the Russians control this huge amount of open fields, this large space that previously the Ukrainians held on to, and a lot of it is due to the specific Russian advance that occurred today. And if they're going to be able to solidify it, then they'll have a really good launch pad, a firing point to advance, but also just to shell directly into Kurakhove and overlook it. Especially given how it's like just adjacent to the Vovcha River, that should give you an idea of how low it really is in elevation. And to finish off with the Velyka Novosilka front, you can see that Ukrainian sources admitted that at the beginning of the month there was Russian tactical success near Levadne, leading to the capture of nearby tree lines, although they say not the village itself. They also say that they were able to repel attacks that were occurring northwards towards the ravine that I discussed in earlier videos. This ravine served, and I say it with past tense because of the video I'm about to show you, as a forward line for the Ukrainian side, originally used to assault towards Prutny, but again, it really never materialized and then just became a forward staging point. So you had, and we don't know exactly when this occurred, but probably at the beginning of the month, an organization of Russian motorcyclists advance northwards and actually storm into the tree lines, into the ponds around here. So they got a not a significant advance, but it's about 1.1 kilometers. And then the Ukrainian side, they released their own footage showing a DPICM cluster munition strike onto the location of those motorcyclists. There were more than 6 of them, more than 6 motorcycles filmed in the footage. And there wasn't any sort of elaboration based on video footage of what happened to them, just that the Ukrainians claim that they were repelled in that specific instance. But I'm going to mark it as a Russian advance until it's proven otherwise. You can see here that the involvement was the 336th Naval Infantry Brigade, and also not this unit, but specifically the 394th Motor Rifle Regiment that was mentioned by Ukrainian sources. And so that's all that for today. Thank you all so much for watching. Tell me, guys, how you feel about using the map with the left side panel in white, or just using the embed map without any ruler. And thank you all for watching. Goodbye.